Thank you. Good evening, councillors, officers and our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Lena Messina and I'm the Mayor of Darebin City Council and the chairperson of tonight's meeting. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's council meeting. I declare this meeting open at 6:03 p.m. Before, I will do the acknowledgement of country. Darebin City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri Wurrung people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters we now call Darebin, and pays our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Council pays respects to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Darebin. Council recognises and pays tribute to the diverse culture, resilience and heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the right to self-determination in the spirit of mutual understanding and respect. Before we commence, I'd like to congratulate the Dan Andrews Labor government and all candidates who have nominated and who I know currently there's still some counting happening, but also I'd like to congratulate all the candidates, all the winners and also all contributors to this amazing democratic society that we have. Before we commence, I'd like to introduce councillors and senior staff who are with us this evening. We have Councillor Trent McCarthy, the Deputy Mayor. Good evening. Councillor Emily Dimitriadis. Councillor Julie Williams. Councillor Tom Hannon. Councillor Susan Rennie. And Councillor Suzanne Newton. Welcome back, Suzanne. And our officers tonight are Peter Smith, the CEO, JD Watson, who's General Manager Governance and Engagement, Sam Hewitt, General Manager Operations and Capital, Melanie McCartinen, who's the Acting General Manager of Communities, and Rachel Olivia, who's the General Manager of City Sustainabilities, and can I also welcome John Watson, our Municipal Monitor. Let's get underway. Apologies tonight, we have Councillor Tim Lawrence who's absent and Councillor Gaetano Greco. Item number 4, councillors, we have disclosures of conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare from our councillors and officers?
Mayor, I'd like to declare that I don't have a conflict on Thornbury Park Estate, and I'll do that at the item.
Thank you. Noted. That's item 9.1. Yes. Just for confirmation. And Peter Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, to declare a conflict of interest in item 9.6. It contains a recommendation in relation to the Chair of the CEO Employment Matters Committee and confidential item 13.1, which is also about that committee. I'll absent myself from the meeting for those items and ask Jodie Watson to take the Chair as presiding officer for those items.
Thank you. Noted. And can I ask you all both to complete the form that I hope is on your desks. Item number 5.
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
I also have a conflict, not a direct conflict, but a conflict. There's an item for discontinuance of a right-of-way for Oak Hill. I live a street away, so I'd like to declare a conflict if possible. But
it's a property matters item?
Yes, I do not know the people in regards to this. As I said, I live over a street away, but I just thought in the vicinity, I think I would be best to declare.
Can I ask you to note the item, please, Councillor Williams?
Good question.
Is that item number
9.5 under property matters?
Property matters. Thank you. Noted. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll ask you to make a declaration at that item. Thank you. Councillors, we move on to the next items. Item number 5, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Can I please have a motion, councillors? Councillor McCarthy?
Happy to move the recommendation.
Yep. Happy to second by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Thank you. That's been passed unanimously. Item number 6 is Council's occupational health and safety responsibility. The health and safety and wellbeing of the community has and will always be a paramount consideration of the Council. Council continues to be guided by the government directives and wants to be able to do the right thing for the health of our community councillors and council staff. The Chamber, both virtually or in person, is both a workplace, a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. Item number 7 is public question times. There has been a little bit of a change, so I will just make a statement and I hope the statement addresses a little bit in relation to how we move forward. Members of the public were invited to submit questions before 12 noon today. A response for those questions have been prepared where possible and will be provided by the relevant General Manager. I ask that you read only your question. Introductory or background statements are not permitted pursuant to Council's governance rules. The minutes of these meetings will record the question in full, subject to complying with the governance rules. If a person who submitted a question is not in attendance, a governance officer will read out the question and the relevant General Manager will provide the response. Like questions will be grouped together and I'll ask the person from whom the first like question was received to come forward and read their question. A single response will be given for the like questions. In the event that the person who submitted the like question is not in attendance, a governance officer will read out the like questions and the names of the person who submitted the like questions. The relevant General Manager will then provide a response. Before we commence, please note that the public question time will not exceed 30 minutes in duration unless extended by the resolution of Council through a procedural motion, in which case it may only be extended for one more period for up to 30 minutes. As I invite persons who submitted their questions online to come forward and ask their questions, I remind you that you only have to ask 3 questions and cannot exceed 2 minutes in total. I'll also request that you refrain from introductory comments and background statements. In accordance with Council's Governance Rules, Section 15.31D, questions related to notice of motions, petitions or urgent business will not be accepted. For the members of public who have requested to ask a question virtually, I will call out your name and when it is time and a member of the Governance Services team will unmute your audio and request that you turn your camera on so you can ask your questions to staff. Until then, mute our audio and turn your camera off when you ask your questions. Just to remind you, no questions will be taken from people in attendance tonight unless those questions were submitted online before 12 p.m. today or in line with our Council's governance rules. Okay, the first question we have is from Kayla Drew from Brunswick East. Is Kayla in the gallery? As Kayla is not in the gallery, I'm going to ask the Governance Officer to ask the question and then the relevant GM to answer the question.
Thank you, Mayor. Our first question from Kayla, she's submitted 3 questions. The first is, can you please address what actions or plans are underway for removing the huge amount of plastic and other litter distributed along the Merry Creek and by the floods 1 month ago? 2, what will be done to pinpoint the source of all this rubbish and install rubbish traps and stormwater drain infrastructure to prevent this happening again? And 3, has the Council sent any crews to assess the damage or begin the clean-up process? There is too much rubbish in and along the creek for it to be cleaned by small community groups alone, and we need help.
Thank you. Mr Hewitt.
Thank you very much for your questions. Council staff joined Melbourne Water staff and spent 2 weeks cleaning debris from the waterways, bridges and paths after the floods. We'll continue this effort if requested by Melbourne Water. In relation to question 2, we have over 30 gross pollutant traps across our city which collects rubbish before it enters the stormwater system. Council frequently liaises with various stakeholders such as Melbourne Water and community groups to understand community littering hotspots, and we implement appropriate solutions like stormwater infrastructure, maintenance regimes and community education. And finally, whilst the water body of Merry Creek is managed by Melbourne Water, Council staff continue to undertake clean-up and rectification works along the banks of the creek corridor. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Hewitt. Is Mark Tregonin from Thornbury in the gallery this evening? He's not. I might go over to the Governance Officer to ask the question.
Thank you, Mayor. From Mark Tregonin of Thornbury. I note the recent Arbiter's decision which found that a Darebin councillor committed misconduct. The Arbiter used his powers to sanction the councillor, including directing them to undertake retraining. Who will pay for the councillor's retraining? Does Council propose to make changes to its internal systems to prevent similar misconduct recurring in the future as far as possible? And if they do recur, respond to them more effectively? And if so, what will those changes be?
Over to you, Ms Watson.
Thank you for the question, Mark. I can confirm that the cost of retraining will be covered by Council for that matter. In relation to question 2, Darebin Council will continue to support councillors to strengthen conduct and governance at Council, including ensuring that councillors are aware of their role and responsibilities within the Local Government Act and the need to adhere to the Darebin Council Code of Conduct in their interactions with each other, with council staff and with members of the community. Internal systems can guide councillors, however the conduct of councillors is their own individual responsibility. The complaint process itself is managed by the Principal Council Conduct Registrar, appointed by the Minister for Local Government, not by Council. In relation to question 3, I can confirm that the current framework that supports councillors with conduct and interaction expectations has been reviewed and will be presented to Council at the December Council meeting. This includes the Code of Conduct, Councillor Interaction Policy, Councillor OHS Policy and the Social Media Policy. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Question number 3 was submitted by Angela Denton of Northcote. Is Angela in the gallery? No? I'll ask the Governance Officer to please ask the question through.
Thank you, Mayor. From Angela, I received a call from Council Officer from the Transport team under the guise of following up on a disability parking space outside my house in Northcote. When questioned, I was advised that the General Manager had asked the officer to call me ahead of time and ahead of the release of the updated parking plan for the High Street precinct. For the record, I have never requested a disability parking bay outside my house, but rather have asked Council to enforce the recent amendment to the planning permit at 21 Aldous Avenue, whereby a significant street parking waiver was granted, which nonetheless provides for 3 off-street car parks. The owner has erected a gate, and access to the 3 car parks for the residents at 21 Aldous Avenue have no access to the off-street parking, but rather utilise parking on Aldous Avenue. Can Council provide information as to why I'm being asked if I want provision made for a disability car park outside my house, rather than addressing the actual issue, which is the decision to grant the waiver in the first place? Council's failure to enforce the existing parking restrictions in Aldous Avenue, Northcote, and Council's failure to enforce planning compliance to provide access to the on-street parking at 21 Aldous Avenue, Northcote.
Thank you. And I ask.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Angela, for your question. Council has previously investigated your concern about planning compliance at 21 Aldous Avenue and not found a compliance issue at that location. The most recent correspondence you've received from me about this is still current, and it outlines the reasons for Council's conclusions. I can confirm that the parking enforcement team regularly patrol in the Northcote area, including in Aldous Avenue, and the main reason our staff reached out to you ahead of the broader public consultation in your local area is to understand if there are any accessibility needs we should provide for. I'm sorry if for any concern or distress this has caused. Certainly our intent has been to assist.
Thank you. Is Catherine Maguire with Thornbury in the gallery this evening? Welcome, good evening. Please come and ask your question. I understand that you have 3 questions. Sure. We've got the questions. Would you like us to?
Thank you so much. Good evening. Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for letting me speak. I'd like to ask a few questions about the Thornbury Park Estate Heritage Overlay. My first question is, how does Darebin Council intend to protect residents with properties within the special building overlay from future flood inundation? Climate change appears to be changing the 1 to 100 year flood situation, so I question why we are being forced to maintain houses with floor levels below Melbourne Water's minimum height data requirements. Would you like me to ask all three? Thanks, Mayor. With increasing moves to efficient design utilising current building science, why is Darebin Council making it more difficult rather than less to build environmentally sustainable houses, for example, Passive House, the German standard, or high NatHERS star ratings? My third question pertains to some of the houses that were deemed non-contributory. On what grounds were houses such as 72 Keon Street, 100 and 102 Rennie Street, etc., made non-contributory? According to expert statements made at the independent panel justifying the inclusion of particular buildings, the original form of the building must be readable. This is clearly the case for these properties, so I question what justification exists for their particular designation and houses in a similar situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Olivier.
Thank you for the questions, Catherine. So Council will make a decision about this topic tonight, and the responses I'll provide are essentially sort of clarifications around some of the advice that officers have provided to Council about the matter. So your first question was about flood risk. I can certainly clarify that a heritage overlay doesn't prevent property owners in a special building overlay area from modifying their homes to address flood risk. What we ask is that the designers try and achieve both objectives. In regards to question 2, similarly, the heritage overlay doesn't prevent measures to improve the environmental performance of buildings. It does mean that when the design around the building is done, that it needs to consider some heritage matters that other buildings might not need to. Council commissioned a report from a sustainability consultant that found that high energy efficiency ratings and excellent operational energy outcomes can be achieved while also protecting the heritage fabric. In regards to the locations which you've cited in your question and the reasons for them being non-contributory, so the panel recommended that 72 Keon Street be regraded to non-contributory. This was because it was assessed by Council's heritage expert as having low intactness. In regards to 100 and 102 Rennie Street, they're both post-World War II dwellings, and the panel recommended that all post-World War II dwellings be downgraded to non-contributory because they don't contribute to the heritage value of the precinct as a whole.
Thank you. The fifth applicant to ask a question is Brian Shanagan of Preston. I'm assuming. Over to the Governance Officer.
Brian's question is, I wish to know how much was spent by Council on Gaetano Greco's Save the Preston Market political advertising.
Over to you, Ms. Watson.
Thank you for your question, Brian. Whilst we don't typically respond to questions about individual councillors, I will provide a response on this to confirm that Council did not contribute to any electoral matter for any candidate.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Nick Montgomery of Northcote, and I understand Nick is online by Zoom. Good evening and welcome, Nick.
Good evening, and thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to ask a question. I'm very lucky to live on Bridge Street in Northcote between Merry Station and High Street. Last week, parking on part of one side of the street was changed from parallel to angle parking. I was surprised to receive no notice of this, although I don't live directly opposite. In the context of Darebin Council's Declaration of Climate Emergency in 2016, the significant contribution of motor vehicles to greenhouse gas pollution, the existing abundance of parking in Bridge Street, and the increasing danger to cyclists posed by angle parking, why has Darebin Council installed more parking? And I note further that if road space is to be reallocated, it should be done similar to Union Street to the south, which supports greatly increased biodiversity through the planting of native vegetation.
Thank you. I'll ask Ms. Olivier to answer that question.
Nick, thank you for the question. I am going to look at the camera and I think you'll be able to see me. The main reason for installing the parking in that location is essentially to trial whether it helps deal with some quite intense parking pressure in the area. So it's a trial of 3-hour parking during business hours on weekdays, and it's to support residents to access their properties in that location. So we did that after residents contacted council and raised concerns about parking demand in the area, and our office's assessments confirmed that there is high demand. And so essentially we're seeking to balance the needs of many road users in that location. It is a trial. Council will review it in 6 months, and we'll take certainly your question and interest in both biodiversity and the needs of cyclists essentially as feedback. I'll make sure that gets to the team.
Thank you. The next question we have for consideration this evening is from Pia Edney Brown from Thornbury. Are you in the gallery, Pia? I ask that the Governance Officer please read out Pia's question.
Thank you, Mayor. Pia's question, she has 2 questions. The first is, if property in the Thornbury Park estate is deemed non-contributory, this appears to mean it will still be subject to the heritage overlay. What difference does a non-contributory designation make at a planning application level? And question 2, the overlay would render many residents in the SBO likely unable to protect their homes from future flooding through rebuilding with a higher flood level. Given the ever-increasing risk of flooding due to the climate emergency, will the Council consider a working group in consultation with residents that develops and offers information to assist residents prepare for and protect their homes from flooding via other means, such as landscaping, levees, planning for sandbagging, etc.?
Thank you. Ms. Olivier.
Thank you, Pia, for the questions. So your first question was about what's the difference for a non-contributory property under the heritage overlay. So if a heritage overlay is adopted and then supported by the Minister, so once it's in place, a non-contributory property would still need to apply for a planning permit. And what would be happening in consideration of that permit is to ensure that it's designed sensitively in regards to the heritage streetscape and sort of the character of the street. What is different is that non-contributory properties benefit from a range of exemptions, for example, demolition and the level of modification that's possible on that site. So typically you would expect a non-contributory property to be able to be demolished, but it would still need to apply for a permit, and the design of a new dwelling would need to be sensitive to the character of the street. You raised a concern about flooding and the ability to rebuild. I can confirm that a heritage overlay doesn't prevent property owners from addressing flood risk. It is something there are a few different design options for. And then in regards to your suggestion for how to support residents to prepare for a flood, the suggestion of a working group, thank you. We don't currently have plans for a sort of outreach group or a working group like that, but there is good information available. Melbourne Water, for example, have got some really good resources on being prepared for flooding, and it goes into some of the sort of retrofitting and building works that owners can consider.
Thank you. The next question we have for consideration this evening, and Samantha Knott of Thornbury, my understanding is that you're here in the gallery. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Hello everyone. So my question, I've got 2 questions tonight. The first one is, where is the precedent for council ignoring an independent panel's report to such a significant extent and including 146 properties that the independent panel recommended specifically not including? How many times has council gone against the recommendations of an independent panel when it relates to such a large number of properties, being 146? That's my first question. My next question is, has council considered the financial impact on residents of the heritage overlay with respect to insurance, given that many home insurers would not insure houses with heritage overlay? This is an additional premium on top of the many houses which have already increased premiums due to flood overlays.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha, for coming out and for your questions. The first thing I think it's worth saying is that council hasn't yet made its decision. It will make its decision tonight. Certainly the report that officers have prepared for council makes a recommendation that isn't the same as the independent panel's recommendation. And essentially that is a not uncommon part of the process. It doesn't happen in every case, but council officers need to consider the panel's advice and essentially make their own decision at that point in time, which is what's happened in this case. We don't have the sort of specific data or statistics you've asked for in regards to the number of times council might have made a similar recommendation. In regards to financial impact on residents, so council will make its decision tonight. That decision hasn't been made. What I can share is that the panel found that individual financial impacts weren't a relevant consideration when determining the application of a heritage overlay. In regards to insurance, certainly homes in a heritage overlay are commonly insured. We don't expect a particular barrier to arise in relation to insurance. I would encourage any residents experiencing challenges to speak to their provider or other providers if there are local challenges emerging. And I can confirm that there's no impediment to rebuilding under a heritage overlay should an original house be destroyed in some kind of event.
Thank you. The next question we have for consideration this evening is Jeremy Allen of Thornbury, who I understand may be in the gallery this evening. Good evening and welcome.
Do you mind if you bring my question forward? Because I don't have it.
Yes, sure. Does anybody have a copy? Thank you, Miss.
I can't remember it, but I don't want to get it wrong.
That's okay.
Yeah. Good evening. Thanks very much for your time. The stated reason for increasing the heritage overlay on the council's website beyond that recommended by the independent panel is that the proposed revised precinct removes less intact areas while retaining as much heritage as possible. Can the planning officers provide the facts to support this statement? It appears that the streets to be excluded from the revised precinct contain 162 contributory properties, while those to be included contain only 95 contributory properties.
Thank you. Ms. Olivier.
Thank you, Jeremy. Essentially what council officers have looked at is the proportions and the sort of broader neighbourhood streetscape in making that assessment. And so the difference between the area that sort of remains excluded in council officers' recommendation and the area that we've recommended be included is that there's a lower proportion of heritage properties in the one that is remaining excluded. The one that we've recommended be included, it's got a similar proportion to the precinct to the west.
Thank you. The next question we have for consideration this evening is from Ruth Jelly from Northgate. Good evening and welcome. Good to see you again, Ruth.
Good evening. Thank you for the warm welcome. I have 3 questions this evening. So in relation to Council's previous policy of requiring the public or members of the public who want to ask a question at question time to provide their full street address, noting that this policy seems to have changed. So following a spate of significant data breaches in Australian organisations in recent months, can Council explain how long it will retain such sensitive personal information as our full addresses that it has collected from community members who've asked questions and made submissions to Council meetings during the time that policy was in place? My second question pertains to the questions I asked last month about Your Street, Your Say Group A. Can Council please confirm what goals, if any, these projects aim to deliver on to the community under the Council plan and or the transport strategy? And also, how does that approach align to the principles of transparency, including those associated with the justification of expenditure as outlined in legislation and also Council's public transparency policy?
Thank you. Your questions will be answered. The first one over to Jodie. Ms. Watson.
Thank you for the question, Ruth. Just to answer your first question, Council's information privacy policy aligns the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner's Information Privacy Principle 4.2, which aims to ensure that organisations don't retain information for longer than is necessary, and certainly not for an indefinite term. Any personal information that you provide to Council which is no longer necessary for Council's purposes has been disposed of in accordance with the document disposal requirements under the Public Records Act.
Thank you. Ms. Olivier, would you like to answer question 2 and 3?
Thanks for your questions, Ruth. So the Your Street, Your Say program is explicitly designed as an integrated program. So that means it's trying to achieve several objectives in the way that it helps us forward plan. And so some of those are in the council plan, some of them are in the Darebin transport strategy. The key council plan objective is we will design and create public spaces where our people feel safe, welcome and respected, including improving lighting and safety for people walking, wheeling, cycling and driving. The approach in regards to transparency, there are a few different elements of the program that are really set up about transparency. Key elements include the community engagement program and approach. So we really deliberately use a two-stage approach to try and make sure we understand needs and then also to test specific plans and proposals with community. And we work really hard to reach a broad and deep section of the community in that work. That's reported to Council in a public way, sort of with both the technical advice and the community feedback. And then Council also considers and endorses the priority capital works projects through a public report. More broadly, some of Council's sort of planning and budgeting and reporting processes fit around this program. So our annual budget cycle is part of that transparency process, so is the annual Council Plan Action Plan and the annual reporting cycle.
Thank you. Councillors, can I have a procedural motion to extend public question time for another 30 minutes? That was moved by Councillor McCarthy, second by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? It's been carried. You did move that. I did see your hand. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Then how much better is this process? I'm just enjoying it, having it directed this way. Can I have the next question for consideration is John Nugent of Epping. Good evening. Good to see you again, John. There's one question. Yeah, I believe there's only one question.
Yeah, but since I'm only going to ask one question, Mayor, why do you put the time on when it's 2 minutes 20 and question time's already gone? So when you start your spiel,
it's 30 minutes.
It's 30 minutes, but the first question wasn't asked till 27 minutes 40 seconds.
Okay, I'll take that on board, John. Thank you for that feedback. And if we need to extend it by a further 3 minutes, I will. Thank you, John.
Also, while we're last council meeting, I submitted 3 questions which weren't passed on to you good people, and you received my copy of questions. Now, I've been asking the customer service people to return those questions to me, but till date, nothing's been...
Okay, I understand those questions. I do recall the last council meeting that those questions were to be submitted and you were to get a response, I think, from the CEO.
No, I thought there were...
Just one moment, John.
Through you, Mayor, I met with Ms Nugent and we have provided and are still providing responses. Mr Nugent should ask the question he's submitted in advance tonight, not questions that he's not submitted. So we ask Mr Nugent to ask the question he's submitted or resume his seat.
Please, Mr Nugent, can you please ask your question? There'll be a follow-through.
Sorry, I think the CEO's got me mixed up. I asked 3 questions that weren't asked.
No, he was. I understood the question. Please ask your question in relation to this. We'll follow it through.
Mayor. Mayor Messina, could you please advise why the women's football was played in mid to late August at the City Oval, along with the men's football in September, that affects the parking in the market and around the city? This also is caused by council leasing out the City Oval. While about 6 to 8 kilometres away, there is a first-class stadium named the Bill Laurie Oval with lights on it, which is far superior to the City Oval.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that your question is addressed by Melanie McCartan.
Thank you for your question, John. So we recently responded to this question via letter following your meeting with the CEO in early November, and we've also responded to this question on many previous occasions. So if you're yet to receive that letter that we have sent, I would advise you to check your letterbox because it should have arrived by now.
Thank you, John. Please resume your seat. John, please resume your seat. Your question's been out. If you don't receive your letter, please call me. And John, I understand there's a question. The answer's been questioned in your letter. Thank you. I have not seen the letter, John, but I understand that's been addressed. And you've asked that question many times. Just one moment. I'm going to ask the CEO to address this. Thank you, given that it's operational.
Through you, Mayor. Mr Newton, when I met with you, I explained that we're trying to share football grounds, that we're aware of the impact on parking in a busy city centre, and that advice has been provided to you by letter. So I believe you've had an answer, and I believe, sir, you should resume your seat. And I'm happy, as I said to you prior to the meeting, to meet with you again if you need to meet with me. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question for consideration is Owen Eaton of Thornbury. Are you in attendance in the gallery this evening? No? Can I ask the Governor's Officer to please read out the question?
Thank you, Mayor. Owen has submitted 3 questions. The first is, given the Council's original commitment to protect the heritage and cultural significance of all contributory homes in the Thornbury estate, do councillors consider that the officer's recommendation to excise 5 Hutton and Harold Streets between Bracken Avenue to St George's Road diminishes the overall heritage significance and residential amenity of the exhibited recommendations of their appointed heritage and conservation consultants? 2, if the council officer's recommendation to excise the nominated sections of 5 Hutton and Harold Streets from their proposed precinct are approved by council, what changes will be made to the existing planning requirements to protect the heritage value and cultural significance of contributory homes in those streets, given that RB heritage and conservation experts specifically noted that all contributory properties in the exhibited plan were considered equally worthy of heritage protection? And 3, if the planning requirements are to be amended to protect the heritage values and cultural significance of the contributory homes in 5 Hutton and Harold Streets between Bracken Avenue and St George's Road, will there be an opportunity for community consultation before council approves the changes and sends them to the Planning Minister for approval?
Thank you. Over to you, Ms Olivier.
Thank you for the question. Certainly in regards to your first question, it's mostly directed to councillors, and council will make its decision a little bit later. I can clarify that in regards to the recommendation that officers have put in their report to council, that essentially we've attempted to take into account the panel's concerns about the higher proportion of non-contributory properties in the southeastern part of the precinct. In regards to your second question about if the recommendation from officers was adopted and essentially went ahead from council at a smaller footprint than was originally proposed, how would contributory homes in those excluded areas be protected? Essentially, council will make its decision about the right boundary tonight. Any properties that are excluded from the heritage boundary wouldn't be subject to heritage requirements or protections. No other protections would typically be pursued for those properties with other planning tools. And finally, you have asked about further consultation. Certainly we're coming towards the tail end of the decision-making process. There's a council decision tonight. If council adopts the planning scheme amendment tonight in whatever form, it would then go to the Minister for final decision. There isn't a formal consultation step at this stage of the process. What community members can do is write to the Minister for Planning about their concerns.
Thank you. The next question we have for consideration is from Evan Manders of Thornbury. Is Evan in the gallery this evening? I'll ask the Governance Officer to read out Evan's question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Evan has submitted 2 questions. 1, certain properties that are considered contributory in the overlay are completely surrounded by non-contributory properties, e.g. 1, 13 and 30 Rennie Street, 46 Keon Street, 31 Miller Street. Will these properties also be regraded to non-contributory? And question 2, the recommended option 1 includes adding 2 half streets east of Bracken. This makes the overlay look completely disjointed as there is no natural buffer or flow between heritage and non-heritage streets in this section of the estate. The findings used to justify recommending option 1 don't add up. In the case of Rennie Street, 37% of properties are deemed non-contributory versus streets not included, Fife 39%, Harold 32% and Hutton 34%, which are not contributory. Why is the planning panel's recommendation, option 2, not being followed?
Now I understand that question would be answered by Ms Olivier.
Thank you, Evan, for the questions. So in terms of your question about the properties that are surrounded by non-contributory properties, essentially that's somewhat normal in a precinct like this. The intactness of the street is considered more broadly than sort of at that specific property level. And that's the basis of the analysis and the recommendation. In regards to your second question, I've really interpreted that more as a comment rather than a question, and I note that in terms of why the officers have made the recommendation, we've had a couple of similar questions earlier tonight.
Thank you. The next question we have for consideration is from Bill Jennings of Preston West. Is Bill in the gallery? I don't think I've seen him. No. Over to the Governance Officer.
Thank you, Mayor. Bill has submitted 3 questions. The first is, this question is about the status of the $200,000 grant offered to Darebin City Council by the Victorian Government in their last electoral term for specific design funding to ensure the best 9 holes and the best newly identified parkland at Northcote Public Golf Course. Has Darebin received the money as yet? 2, if the answer to question 1 is yes, when will the council engage a qualified golf architect as is stipulated in the funding criteria? And 3, if the answer to the question is no, is council still counting that $200,000 in its $950,000 budget to implement the changes outlined in the resolution that was passed about the golf course at the July 2022 meeting?
Thank you. Over to Mr Hewitt.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the question, Bill. Council's been liaising with Sport and Recreation Victoria regarding the grant criteria applicable to the golf course, and we've subsequently submitted an application. We've yet to receive confirmation of the grant being awarded, the conditions attached, or received any funding associated with it. So I'll jump to number 3 because we haven't received any funding. When Council considered the shared use of the course in May 2022, the total expenses we identified, we estimated at $950,000 over 2 years. We didn't have a grant application in at that time, and we're not relying on it at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Hewitt. The next question we have for consideration this evening is from Jen Peters of Thornbury. Jen, are you in the gallery? Jen has submitted 3 questions. I'll ask the Governance Officer to read all 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 1 from Jen. Does the Planning Department acknowledge that the submission data provided to councillors to consider the amendment on the 28th of March was in fact incorrect and did not include submissions that made that day prior to the 12 p.m. deadline? 2, can the Planning Department confirm that there were at least 6 submissions received prior to the 12 p.m. deadline that were not included in the data provided to councillors, and that all of these submissions were in fact against the overlay? And 3, can the Planning Department confirm that one of the submissions, submission 17, omitted from the data provided to councillors was in fact made of 20 individual objections?
Thank you. Over to you, Ms Olivier.
Thanks, Jen, for the questions. I can advise that we're not aware of any submissions that haven't been shared with councillors ahead of their decision. So on the 28th of March, we tabled all late submissions made before the deadline in an appendix that was considered by councillors on the night and referred to the planning panel. We're aware of 8 submissions received prior to 12 p.m. These were tabled on the 28th of March and shared with council and the panel. And yes, we agree that the one submission was in fact made by, had 20 signatures. Certainly the way we've treated that is to counter in line with the Planning and Environment Act, where multiple signatories to a submission are treated as one submission. This was noted in the information provided to councillors as having 20 signatures. So I'm confident that sort of the information handling's been appropriate.
Thank you. The next item of consideration is, I don't have a surname, but it says Michael of Thornbury. So is Michael of Thornbury here this evening in the gallery? Michael has also submitted 3 questions. I'll ask our Governance Officer to read out the 3 questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 1, can the Planning Department confirm that submission 126 included 24 objections against the overlay, and that submission 179 included 20 individual objections against the overlay, and that these 44 objections against the overlay were only counted as 2 submissions not in favour of the overlay? Question 2, can the Council confirm that when you consider the 44 objections individually and not as a group, that the correct data shows 154 individuals, or 69.4%, against the overlay, and 68 individuals, 30.6%, for the overlay? And question 3, considering that over 500 homes are still impacted by the proposed overlay under the new boundaries, can the Planning Department confirm how many significant residential properties or homes, not including commercial properties or the church manse, remain in the new boundaries?
Thank you. Ms Olivier.
Thank you, Michael, for your questions. In regards to the 24 objections you refer to that were made by multiple individuals referring to the same letter, I can confirm that these have been treated as separate submissions. As as per the last question, the submission that was a single submission signed by 20 people was considered as one, which is in line with the Planning and Environment Act. In terms of your request around calculation of the data and the percentages, we haven't used quite the same methodology that you're proposing or using in your question, and haven't sort of recalculated that using a different methodology at this stage. What I can say is that there's detailed information about the submissions in the report to Council from the 28th of March, which is when those sort of detailed breakdowns were provided. In regards to your third question about how many significant residential properties there are, we understand you're referring to the heritage gradings of properties, and in that regard there were 2 significant properties and 382 contributory properties.
Thank you. That's the end of the question time this evening. Thank you. That process is so much better than before, so I'll welcome to further council meetings. He will be addressing them that way by whoever the mayor is at the time. Submissions. Council's governance rules permit members of the public to register to address an ordinary council meeting in relation to matters listed on the agenda, with a few exceptions. Thank you to those who have registered their intention to do so this evening. Prior to the relevant item agenda, those people who have registered to make a submissions will be invited to come forward one by one to address council. Can I ask that person to please turn off their phone? If anyone has registered to make a submission virtually, I will call out your name when it is time, and a member of the governance service team will unmute you and request to turn your camera on so you can make your submission. Staff will then mute your audio and turn your camera off when you've finished your submission. Item number 8 is petitions. Councillors, we have one petition to be tabled this evening. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Messina. So I have a petition to be tabled. It's quite long. Would you like me to read a shorter version of it? Yep. Yep. Okay. So it's help Friends of Edwards Lake protect and support Darebin's wildlife, pets and humans by ensuring the off-leash rules are clear at Edwards Lake Park. And in general, this is about a dog attack that Kate Joss, President of the Friends of Edwards Lake, witnessed on Black Swan's Kevin Mabel and their clutch of 5 cygnets. A dog lunged at the Black Swan family and pulled out some of Kevin's feathers. The owner did not have control of the dog, and the dog attacked 2 cygnets. Kate managed to get herself between the dog and the swan so the owner could gain control and get the owner to remove himself and the dog away from the swan family. Kate took the 2 physically injured cygnets to a local wildlife carer for medical treatment and care, but one of the cygnets died 16 hours later from suspected internal injuries. The other cygnet was returned to Kevin and Mabel, but has not been seen with the family hours later. And Friends of Edwards Lake volunteers will continue to monitor the beloved family and hope the 4th cygnet makes an appearance again. So what the petition does, we're referring it to the CEO, and it asks the City of Darebin to remove the off-leash dog area between the athletics track and path now that the new fenced off-leash dog park is open. Update the council website with information about the Edwards Lake Dog Park, including rules about dogs to be on lead and under control at all times when outside the fenced off-leash park. Update the community directory with updated information that all dogs must be on lead and under control within the park at all times unless they're at the off-leash dog park. Request that various websites update with the relevant information. Install signage on the footpaths and on signposts clearly stating dogs must be on lead and under control to protect wildlife. Install clear signage at the exits of the dog park that is separate to the dog park rules, clearly stating dogs must be on lead and under control to protect wildlife. And there's also a part about local laws officers providing educational workshops about responsible pet ownership and providing dog training opportunities at Edwards Lake Off-Leash Dog Park. Receive a briefing from Parks and Open Space team to start patrolling the Edwards Lake and Edgars Creek wetlands at peak dog exercising times to provide education about responsible pet ownership and issue fines if necessary. And finally, local laws officers to meet with the Friends of Edwards Lake Committee. And this petition has 61 signatures written, and then it has over 4,500 on an online petition.
Thank you, Councillor. I now invite Kate. Oh, you have another petition?
No, I was happy to submit and have.
We just table the petition, but I'm going to ask Kate who wants to make a statement. Don't need it. Welcome. Good to see you again, Kate.
Mayor Messina, hello. Just want to acknowledge country before I start. Lands with the real Wurundjeri people, so thank you. As Councillor Newton has described, on Tuesday the 25th of October, I witnessed a Swan family, who are affectionately named Kevin and Mabel, be attacked by a dog that was out of control and actually pulled their owner into the water. It's something that will probably stay with me for the rest of my life. And I imagine the dog owner as well. He was as traumatised as I was. As you can imagine, the community has been extremely distressed by this. For those in the room and at home that don't know, Kevin, K35, has been a Darebin resident for over 13 years, longer than I have. And they've been asking, how do we stop this from happening again? Which is a pretty fair question. And I guess the incident is very much dividing our community. You know, the pet owners are upset, the bird watchers are upset, and it's not something that we want out of our community. And we need to build harmonious relationships. And at this present moment in time, it's very unclear how to do that, particularly at Edwards Lake, but at many other conservation creek lines, etc., where wildlife calls it home. They need home and sanctuary as much as we do. It's one of their foundational needs as well as humans need it. All relationships, whether they be with our loved ones, work, within our community, including with our wildlife, Kevin, they need boundaries. And in order for those relationships to be healthy, we need to respect those boundaries. And at this present moment in time, we don't know how to respect those boundaries. So our petition pretty much outlines how we could do that in a very single area and to protect everybody, humans, pets, wildlife. That's all we're really asking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. Councillors, we have a number of certificate items on our agenda this evening, and I'm committed to ensuring we deal with all the business listed within the time limits that we have. To this end, whilst I'm permitting questions of officers prior to the commencement of the debate on each item, I'll be exercising my right under the governance rules to limit questions and direct the debate to commence. And when I determine sufficient question has occurred, I remind councillors that every item on our agenda has been subject of comprehensive councillor briefings, and you've been given ample opportunity to be informed about the issues under consideration. Councillors, the first report we have to consider this evening is item number 9.1, Amendment to C191 DAR Thornbury Park Estate Heritage, consideration of panel report and adoption. We have two registered to address council on this item. Each will have 2 minutes to make their submissions. Is Paul Viscotto in the... Yes? And I invite you to make a submission. And you'll have 2 minutes. Good evening.
Thank you, councillors. Originally, the motion before going to the panel was that an ESD report be compiled, which was done by HIP versus HYPE. Unfortunately, the HIP versus HYPE report has not been peer reviewed. In my submission to the panel, given I'm a qualified matters assessor, I identified 10 errors in that report. My subsequent modelling of the properties that were used in the HIP versus HYPE report and using their assumptions and correcting for the technical errors in contravention of the technical guidelines, none of the properties achieved 7 stars. In actual fact, 6.4 was the best that was achieved for scenario 2, and 6.9 was the best that was achieved for scenario 1. This is all included in my submission to the planning panel. The planning panel also suggested that said the panel appreciates the strong community position with regards to ESD, and in particular the position adopted by Submitter 98 myself, and it's where I suggested a blended heritage approach. they said the council should consider this in consultation with the state government. So I urge that you take that on board, please, and also that the HIP versus HYPE report be peer reviewed as per the original agreement or the original motion, which said it should be reviewed by either the Green Building Council or CSIRO. Several months have passed and it has not been reviewed. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I now invite Jeremy Hanlon, who's in the gallery. I'm assuming he's in the gallery. Is Jeremy in the gallery this evening? No? Is Jeremy online? Governance? Oh, you didn't? Would you like to speak for 2 minutes?
Thanks. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to speak. I thought I'd ask my questions earlier. I think it's just to reiterate that I'm not entirely clear as to why the council officers are proposing, or the planning officers are proposing, to ignore the advice of the expert panel that has been independently appointed to look at this matter. As we heard from one of the other questions this evening, the streets that are going to be left out, whereas those ones that are going to be left in, they are very, very similar in terms of the contributory nature of those properties, i.e. there's very little difference in this kind of arbitrary extension to what has been recommended by the panel, so it doesn't make any sense at all. What seems to make more sense is the panel's original instruction or recommendation to use Bracken Avenue as the natural break. So that's probably it. My only final point is that, as I think I made in one of my questions earlier on, is that this has been an extremely tedious and difficult process for all the residents. I think probably for council and maybe for the planning officers as well. So I'd like to register my dissatisfaction with the process as a whole and hope that in future, should such large overlays be considered by Darebin Council, then the lessons from this particularly painful process can be learnt. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Councillors, there are questions, so can I ask, well, I have to ask that question, yeah. Councillors, are there any questions to the officers? I can call the officers to their seats if you've got any questions. Councillors, do I have a motion? I'm going to go over to Councillor Demetriadis, who asked.
Thank you, Mayor. I have an alternate motion that was circulated earlier today.
Is that your full alternate motion, Councillor Demetriadis, to the officer's recommendation?
Yes, that's correct.
In full?
I believe so.
Yeah. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Williams.
Thank you.
Councillor Demetriadis.
I rise today to propose an alternate motion in regards to the Thornbury Estate Heritage Overlay. Council recently referred submissions regarding Thornbury Estate to an independent planning panel, which included experts in environmental sustainability design for residential developments. This panel has now issued Council a report. This report found areas where this expert independent panel agreed with Council's proposed heritage overlay and areas where they did not agree with the proposed overlay. However, the report that's presented to us today is only partially accepting the recommendations from the expert independent panel, and instead an area larger than recommended by the panel, which I believe was stated before 146 properties are now included, is being considered for heritage overlay, which places additional burdens on properties beyond what the panel suggested. While I understand why Darebin's report has recommended this, why we're exceeding the independent panel recommendation, I cannot support that recommendation, especially because it is done without community consultation. The independent expert recommendation was undertaken in good faith with our community, and I believe we should stick to that recommendation.
Any further decision would be going overboard without community consultation, and that is just not good process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demetriadis. Councillor Williams is the seconder. Would you like to speak?
I'd like to kindly reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillors? Councillor Hannan.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't be able to support the this current form of the motion. I have listened closely, and I'm very cognizant of the arguments that have been brought tonight. I understand there is no perfect line on a map you can draw around properties, and there are a number of ways this could have been done. I believe Council has acted in good faith to protect the heritage of Thornbury Estate region in particular as part of the whole of Darebin. It's an important duty for Council, and we need to weigh that up very much with the livability, environmental issues and others that have been raised. I believe it is a process. The process does not stop with the independent panel. The process comes back to Council. And again, Council applies its discretion and its judgment as to what will get the best outcome. I take the advice in the officer's report that on a proportional basis, in terms of the percentage of the particular areas we're looking at, there is an alternative way of drawing that line on the map, which has greater concentrations of heritage in certain areas, and picks up on the point made by the independent panel that there are other areas with, I guess, less density of heritage contributing properties. So it's possible to redraw that map, stay true to the original purpose of the intended overlay.
In seconds.
Again, the process is, this is not the final item. It will be signed off by the Planning Minister, and that will be the next step in the process if people wish to continue that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Are there any further speakers? No, I have to ask for further speakers. You're the seconder, and so I need to know if there's any further speakers. No?
Just one thing, I forgot to declare the
Yes, you
interest at
did.
the start, so just let me know when I should do that.
Can she do that now? Yeah. Sorry, we did. Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, so apologies, but what I was going to say at the start was, councillors, I wish to have it noted in the minutes of this meeting that while I own property in the subject area of this proposed planning scheme amendment, I do so in common with approximately 1,000 property owners, and I form the view that my interest does not exceed that of the interest held by other residents, ratepayers and electors. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further speakers? No? Councillor?
Understandably that I'd like to thank those who have turned up here this evening to actually express their concerns and worries. This has come back and forth to Council a couple of times, and the first time that it came back to Council there was a lot of concerns regarding solar panels, sustainability, those who have disabilities and building ramps, which it wasn't included. Now that has been included, but going forward I feel there's still a whole range of other things that still need to be looked at that haven't been included, and I don't feel 100% quite comfortable where we're sitting right at this point in time without, because once you start putting heritage overlay on properties, it's very hard to remove or get changes to later down the track. And the more you actually include in properties, the harder it is to actually take off. So I feel that when you're putting policies in place like this, it's important that you actually have the community on that journey and to be involved, but to include issues and concerns, whether it's regarding flooding or any other concerns that we haven't looked at, I feel we've actually missed. And it's important that processes like this take a very long time to actually get that end result that gives that satisfaction that's 90%, where I don't feel we're at that point. So I welcome Councillor Demetriadis' amendment this evening.
Thank you. Right, a reply? I'll put that item to the vote. All those in favour of the alternate motion? That's Councillor Williams, Councillor Dimitriadis, Councillor Messina. All those against? That's Councillor Hannan, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Rennie and Councillor Newton. That alternate motion has not been carried. Councillors, do we go back to the officer's recommendation at this point?
Ask if councillors want to move something else.
Oh, yeah, okay. Does councillors wish to move? Thank you.
Mayor, I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder?
Yes, happy to second.
Okay. Okay. Councillor, so that's, I'll put that down as moved by Councillor McCarthy, second by Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and apologies for anyone watching to try to understand what's just happened, but we've had an amendment or an alternative proposed before the officer's recommendation. So I was hoping we might do it the other way around so that we could consider this part of the matter. I'm going to, in a moment, Mayor, just share with councillors what the report actually does say, which I think is important for us to note. But before I do that, I want to thank everyone that's been involved in this process, and I actually agree wholeheartedly with some of the comments that have been made this evening, and obviously hear very clearly the questions that have been raised, because this is not a matter that people genuinely embrace, is to go through a heritage overlay process. They are long, they are cumbersome, they are complicated, and it is reasonable to understand that some people agree with the outcome, some people disagree, but ultimately council needs to make a decision and go through a process. And that process has to be rigorous, that process has to be defensible, and of course that process ultimately lands with the Minister for Planning to make the final decision. So I want to thank everyone that's been involved, submitters in favour and against the heritage overlay, for those who sought to see variations, and for those who contributed and engaged in the process as fully as they possibly could, and I thank them all. Mayor, the report says clearly that following the consideration of all submissions to the amendment, the panel issued the report on the proposed application of the permanent heritage overlay to the Thornbury Park estate. I'll just quote from the report, Mayor, if I may. The panel found the amendment was well-founded and strategically justified and should proceed subject to changes without reducing the size of the heritage overlay area, including reducing the size of the heritage overlay area, removing the post-war housing stock and the area east of Bracken Avenue, Linear Park. Obviously, in front of us this evening, Mayor, we have a report that recommends a variation to the panel's recommendation. That's the officer's assessment, and I take that as it is read and as it is argued in the report. I will note that the panel recommended in relation to some of the submissions, such as in relation to flooding, environmentally significant development outcomes, these were not relevant and can in fact be considered a planning permit stage. So, Mayor, the panel found that council can consider the heritage overlay on its own merits and that those other matters can be dealt with, and as we've heard this evening, can be addressed even at the point of application. Mayor, the officers have recommended a slightly larger heritage area, and I'm supporting that tonight because whilst I understand that there are some households that don't agree with that proposal, I've also heard from others on the other side, this is not a popularity contest of how many we hear from either side, but rather considering the argument on its merits. And based on the officer's recommendation, based on the evidence and the arguments presented, I'm happy to support the recommendation as listed, and I look forward to the Minister's consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Newton, as the seconder, would you like to speak?
Yes, just briefly. Thank you, Mayor Messina, and thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for moving the officer's recommendation. I think we know from the submitters, from the questions tonight, that this is an issue that has varied views in the community, and I know that there has been concern about whether people can make really high, whether they can renovate, whether they can have sustainable buildings within this, and it's one of these things where it's this real balance between individual householders and, I suppose, the community more widely, the amenity of the whole area, and I think this is something where these needs are not easily right or wrong, or one way or the other. But I think what we do have here is a way forward that allows the heritage of this area, which is just beautiful, to be retained. That, as Councillor McCarthy said, it is possible to look at the needs of the community in terms of how they want to renovate through the permit process. So I'm very comfortable with going forward with this heritage overlay, and I think that it will make sure that this Thornbury Park estate stays as beautiful as it is for many, many years to come.
Thank you. Are there any councillors against the officer's recommendation? Councillor Dimitriadis, would you like to speak?
I'll be abstaining.
You'll be abstaining, so you're against and you're, yeah, okay.
Um,
So you're a further speaker, yeah.
So as my alternate motion was not accepted by the majority of this council, I cannot support this officer's recommendation. The recommendation goes further than what the experts of the independent planning panel have advised, which this panel included environmentally sustainable experts who reviewed this matter. But instead, council is playing experts over an independent expert panel, and I find that I don't have any words for that. Not only are they doing that, they're doing that without consultation with the community. So they're not even asking the community what they think about adding this extra patch to the heritage overlay. So the independent expert recommendation was undertaken in good faith with the community. And as I've stated before, the decision goes further, and this recommendation goes further, and it's overboard, and it's without community consultation, and I don't believe that that's good process.
Thank you, councillor. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be supporting this motion, and I've heard from residents who are both in favour of the extended area and residents who would prefer that it remained smaller. And this is complex, but also for the last 6 years, I've stood in planning committee meetings and heard time and time again from objectors to planning permits who have been concerned that what has been proposed in their street is contrary to their neighbourhood character. And many, many times we have been completely unable to protect their neighbourhood character because we have lacked this type of planning control. Ultimately, a heritage overlay is a planning control that will help us protect these streets. And 3 years from now, when we have planning applications come for 4 units or 6 units on a double block in these streets, this is the protection that will enable us to say, no, that's not appropriate. And I think of how many streets in Darebin, how many communities in Darebin have been crying out for this kind of protection so that their neighbourhood character could remain, and ultimately that's why I've come down in support of the larger area. I know that will be difficult for some whose plans for the houses may have to change, but I also think it's important to understand that it is still possible to put in a planning application for the development that people would like to see, and it is equally possible to actually ask a councillor to call in that application to be determined by council. The reason I raise this is because it is conceivable that if a planning application has such architectural or environmental merit, it is possible for Council's Planning Committee to actually say we place higher value on those in heritage protection. And I think that's a message for community members if there are proposals that have that kind of environmental or architectural merit, that it's not a closed door and that is something Council will consider.
Time. Thank you. We've heard from Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Newton and Councillor Dimitriadis and Councillor Rennie. Are there any further speakers? No further speakers. I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? That's Councillor Hannan, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Rennie, Councillor Newton, Councillor Messina. All those against? And Councillor noting that Councillor Williams and Councillor Dimitriadis have abstained. That item's been carried. The next report we have considered this evening is item number 9.2, Declaration of Special Charge Solar Saver Residential Batch 1. Councillors, are there any questions to the officers regarding this item? There are no questions. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor McCarthy, you're moving the officer's recommendation, I'm assuming. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you both to our officers for their continuing work in relation to the rollout of the Solar Saver scheme. And of course, this latest batch, which we have in front of us, which is a residential batch. And a huge congratulations to the new Solar Savers households, of which there are 36 proposed as part of this batch, adding 179.2 kilowatts of solar capacity to Darebin. Mayor and councillors, as you would know, Solar Saver has been an incredibly successful, award-winning program for the City of Darebin. It has been replicated elsewhere. It has set the template for similar models in other states, but significantly, it continues to function as a core part of council's business. We have that here in front of us, the special charge scheme, which enables solar to be put on the roofs of households, particularly in this case, low-income households, pensioner households, those households for whom access to this scheme absolutely gives them access to solar without having to find the money up front. And I think, Mayor, it's worth us recognising that not only are we doing this tonight to support these 36 households, but we'll keep doing it and we'll keep delivering this scheme, I think, as long as this council has that commitment to action on climate emergency. Mayor, I just want to draw councillors' attention as well to the fact that as part of council's work in this space, one of the things that is really important as well is that we do not charge interest to the households that are involved. We fund the operations of this program through council's existing budget, and importantly, in total, over the life of the scheme, over 1,800 households have participated in Darebin solar service programs. That is, I believe it makes it the largest solar output of any council in the country, and it's something we should be very proud of, and I congratulate again those households that are joining us this evening.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie, as a seconder, would you like to speak?
No, thank you.
Are there any further? Are there any against? Are there any further speakers? I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's been carried unanimously. The next report we have to consider this evening is item number 9.3, the 2022-23 Quarter 1 Performance Reporting ending 30th of September 2022, Council Plan, Action Plan and Financial Performance. Are there any questions to the officers, councillors? As there are no further questions, I would like to remind you that once we enter into debate, there are no further questions that will be asked. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Hannan.
I'd like to move the officer's motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor. That's moved by Councillor Hannan, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Hannan, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is the Quarter 1 performance report, as you said. It's part of our Local Government Act requirements and also our commitment to transparency in reporting what we're doing. So this provides a quarterly update on progress towards the Council's action plan, capital works and finances. It's as of 30th September 2022, first quarter of this year, and the main story is that overall Council is progressing well towards the plan. Of 157 individual items, 3 are completed, 124 in progress, 3 on hold and 14 data not yet available. 2 actions have been merged as they essentially deal with the same item, which is about developing and designing a community safety framework. And in the report there are also percentage rates provided on each of Council's Big 10 items or Big 10 actions. In addition to this, there have been 36 resolutions passed since 1st July by Council, and of these 24 have been implemented and 12 are in progress. And it's important to note these because they are addition every time that we as a Council pass a resolution in addition to what's in the agreed action plan. It's quite a long document, but it's very easy to scan through with the colour codings and you can easily find the ratings of how each item's going. In terms of finances, the underlying surplus is approximately 5% below budget, but this is due to timing issues rather than substantive issues. No significant variances expected. Capital works are slightly behind, with approximately $10 million of a budgeted $17 million so far spent for the quarter due to delays in building works. And there are some sector-wide delays in supply and procurement. I understand this is likely to be an ongoing challenge and one to watch. There's already a number of highlights in the report and just a few to touch on the ones that have been done so far. So Council has developed a fast-track planning process for applications in relation to social housing, noting the urgent and growing need for affordable housing in our community. So we want to get those social and affordable housing applications happening as fast as possible. We've partnered with the council to distribute 1,500 brochures with information in 5 languages to targeted audiences. We've run the Libraries After Dark work program, opening up these essential community spaces to movie nights, author talks, wellbeing sessions. Great to see new activities commencing with targeted groups at Narrandjeri Stadium, including pickleball, walking basketball, female futsal, and first ever Treaty Cup tournament coordinated by the Koori Academy Basketball. I'd really like to commend the staff who put this report together, but really the staff of the whole organisation for making this possible, and I commend it to councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Councillor McCarthy is the seconder. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Hannan has covered off on a whole range of performance elements. I'm going to focus in on the elements in relation to our social and sustainable procurement results, Mayor. And as you know, this is a great passion of mine. I was very pleased when Council finally adopted our policy and our framework, and I understand that a number of councils around Victoria are now looking at that framework as a template for their own organisation. So I think that's something that we can be proud of, but I think in particular we should be proud of the work that our officers are doing on a daily basis in terms of using that framework to assess tender applications. We come in at the end of that process and actually approve those, and some of them are approved through the management processes as well if they're under a certain threshold. So Mayor, I want to highlight for councillors and also for the community some of the outcomes that have resulted from the policy that we put in place, because there is a great story to tell here, Mayor, and I think it is worth telling because it's something we can all be proud of. So of the contracts that have been awarded in the 2021-22 financial year, we saw the employment of 3 people from First Nations backgrounds. That's a great outcome. We want to see more of it. And I think it's fair to say that we have our own aspirations internally, but we also want to see the people that we do business with continue to create employment opportunities. 7 people who are identified as disadvantaged or going into apprenticeships and traineeships. Of the number of people in the 15 to 25-year-old category as part of our youth employment dividend, 25% of staff within this age bracket have been employed, which is fantastic. From a gender equity point of view, we've seen obviously a strong application of gender policies and with a 50% gender balance in the executive teams of the businesses that we're dealing with. And lastly, Mayor, I want to highlight the 86,777 hours dedicated to projects in relation to Council's engagement with social and charitable enterprises. This is a report to be proud of. It's a great performance, and I thank the officers for the work.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Just like the governance rules, I have to ask, is there anyone who wants to speak against the motion? Are there any further speakers? I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's been carried unanimously. The next report we have for consideration is the review of the place and road naming policies. Are there any questions to the officers in relation to this policy or this item? No? Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Williams.
I wish to move the notice of motion with some minor amendments.
An alternate motion to the officer's recommendation?
There's just a minor amendment to be added or to be incorporated. The governance team should have those little...
Is this the one that you circulated earlier?
Correct.
Is that the one in full? No. I think we have, I think it's more than that.
Do you want me to read it out?
I think it's more than, is that correct? Not correct. Oh, just hold on a minute. Councillor Williams, did you circulate that to all councillors? You'll just have a few minutes, just because I didn't think that was the correct one.
I thought I did.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, can I confirm that that's your alternate motion?
Yes, it is.
Just one moment. We're just going to get the grammar right. Yeah, that's okay. Councillor Williams, what was the amendment?
She happy with what's on the screen?
Yeah. Councillor Williams, are you happy with what's on the screen, please? This is your alternate motion to the officer's recommendation.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
That's moved by Councillor Williams. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Williams,
Yes,
would you like
thank you.
to speak to the alternate motion?
Darebin City Council is responsible for an extensive range of property assets, including parks, roads, buildings, historical objects and events, and other infrastructure that for many centuries have been dominantly named after significant white men, which doesn't really reflect Darebin Council and our community. Renaming will give the priorities that embody Darebin's identity and heritage whilst respecting culture and ethnic diversity. We have a council action plan alongside to review the renaming, a place or building to ensure it reflects our multicultural and diverse communities and our First Nation. This policy review and update provides the opportunity for council to better align in the direction that supports Darebin's initiatives to promote Wurundjeri language, gender equality, inclusive social justice, community leadership, migrant and multicultural diversity, to better align with Council's current policies and strategies. Darebin is a place that we welcome and respect and value everyone. That includes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people and people from multicultural and diverse backgrounds. Therefore, it was a priority that we do consider to start renaming places that have significant women to address the lack of recognition of women and demonstrate Council's commitment to gender equality. Where naming proposals are in respect to individuals, at least 75% of those naming proposals will be for significant women with considerations of intersexuality and other naming priorities. Names associated with diversity, equality, social justice or community leadership within our community, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA or other leader for diversity, equality, social justice or disadvantage to reflect Council's strong commitment to diversity, equality and social justice. Darebin is a place where we can do and make changes. We need to start having processes to notify that when we do make these changes, that it will be registered to the geographic names for endorsement on the official mapping and it will be gazetted for the details. This will go out to community consultation and a report will come back to Council in March in 2023 on the outcomes from the community. But I look forward to that Council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Rennie, as a seconder, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. This has been a significant piece of work, and I'd particularly like to thank the staff who have worked with us over a number of months and listened to the feedback. And I think it would be fair to say that discussions have been complex and at times they've been difficult. And that's actually because we have all sought to achieve more and to go a bit further to ensure that all future naming in our municipality rights past wrongs in many ways and corrects a historical bias towards the naming of streets, places and landmarks after dominant and privileged groups in the community. And we have an opportunity as a council to make sure that moving forward, the naming of streets, places and landmarks reflects the diversity of our community and elevates the voices, lives and stories of people who are often marginalised. So I'm really excited about the opportunities here, not only those that have been identified, but I'd also like to draw people's attention particularly to section 15.1 of this policy, which would see council be much more proactive in thinking about how we name or how we contribute to the naming of new roads and laneways and landmarks in private development sites. I think this is where there is very significant opportunity when we think about the rezoning of development sites in our municipality. There are going to be new streets and laneways. We want to make sure that the developers, whether it's state government or private developers who are naming those spaces, are cognizant of our policy and our priorities, and that they join with us in righting those past wrongs and making sure that the voices and stories of groups that have been underrepresented in naming are elevated and come to the fore in their thinking. So I'm really excited about a future in which when we walk out into the street, we will see street names and place names that reflect who we are in Darebin, which is a very diverse community.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there any councillors who are against this policy? Councillor Hannan.
Mayor, I just have a very minor amendment, if I could, please. Otherwise, I'm supportive of the policy. Look, I haven't seen it around, but it's just literally 2 words. To add after Woi Wurrung language / people, sorry, just before the word people, to add First Nations people. I can speak to that, but...
Is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
Fine. Yes.
Yes, thank you. So would you like to speak to it or just add the name? I asked for those who want to speak against it. You've foreshadowed an amendment. It's been accepted by the mover and the seconder. So would you like to speak to now?
Yes, briefly.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. So I hope my amendment there is self-explanatory. First Nations should be capital F, capital N usually. It's merely just noting that that's a better way to refer to First Nations people, and Woi Wurrung being the language grouping rather than the name of the group of people. In terms of the rest of the motion, I'm supportive in principle. This was one that we've discussed quite a bit as a council group, and I think it represents, as Councillor Williams and Councillor Rennie have said, there's a joint and common wish among this council to address some of the wrongs of the past in terms of having a much better focus on representing people of different cultures, different genders, different backgrounds, different sexualities, a range of people that make up Darebin, and especially if we're talking about the place and the connection of the land, especially the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people and other First Nations people that make up our Darebin community. I have to say I'm not wedded to the specific numbers. However, I'm not opposed to putting in specific numbers in terms of how many libraries. The point is that this is council signalling a direction to the community, and the important thing is that we put it out to community. We say over to you for your input, and it's right that these facilities belong to the people. We hear from the community, and we have a further report both on the policy itself as well as the individual facilities, which will, each one of those has the pros and cons and a cost that will be considered when we get to the next year's plan and the plan after that. That was my reasoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Really pleased to see this item come to us and also to see the strong support from councillors for the very nuanced approach that I think officers have put forward, and I want to thank them for I suppose the solution that they have arrived at in terms of how we find a balance and a way forward between a range of priorities which are all important and are all important, I think, to our community, but also to the sort of city that we are constantly both developing, evolving and creating together. Mayor, we know, because we've been across this as councillors, but I think it's worth sharing also with the community as well, some of the exciting opportunities that we've got coming up, because we have things, in fact, that we need to name as a city, and those things, some of those are actually mentioned in the report. So, for instance, NARC, Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre, not the greatest name that's ever been created, but with a redevelopment of a facility like this, there is an opportunity, as listed in the report, to identify a name connected with cold and migrant communities, and also intersectionality as well, which I think is really important. The new open space, which we are really excited about, which will be opening next year at the southern end of Northcote Golf Course. Of course, the natural affinity there with the Woiwurrung history along that creek corridor, a great opportunity to take a Woiwurrung name into that place. The Bill Laurie Oval obviously is not going to change, but there is a new pavilion, and so there's an opportunity there to bring a woman's name into that mix and encourage intersectionality. And I'm sure that that would be well received by the clubs that are tenanted there as well. The Kendall and Harding Street Bridge, an opportunity for us to collaborate with our neighbours, the recently renamed Marybeck Council, and of course a chance to look at a Woiwurrung name. And of course, as councillors would know, we made a resolution in the previous term of this council to see the new ward names be named in Woiwurrung language. So lots of opportunities. There are even more in future years, and I'm so excited that we're taking this approach.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Messina. I think just briefly, it might be worth mentioning that when we're putting this out, we are saying in the policy, when naming in respect to individuals, at least 75% will be significant women with consideration to intersectionality with other naming priorities. So this is something that I think is really exciting for the area. Traditionally, there's certainly been more things that have been named after men than women, and we're going to rectify that with this policy. And we sort of tossed and turned around how to do this best. And I think the intersectionality piece is really important, because you may be able to find an individual that is both a woman and is both First Nations, could be cold as well. You know, it's just a really, really good opportunity. And when you think about something like NARC that'll be here for the next 50 years, who or how that will be named and what it'll end up with, I think means that generations to come will know that person or how we end up naming that centre. So I think it's a really good way forward. I'm looking forward to hearing what the community thinks of the policy as well.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Before we put this item to the vote, I'd like to say a few things. Sorry. Darebin Council is committed to diversity and inclusion. Significant component of inclusion is to ensure that our civic spaces are welcoming and improving the area for individuals and groups, those most vulnerable in our society, to feel that they are strong. And our aim is for all voices and for people to feel welcome. This policy may be small for some, but it makes a huge impact, and it will change our municipality, not just today, but for the future and generations to come. An example of that is the impact of Kalamata Lane. And it was such a progressive change, but it made so much change to those people connected to that space. I heard stories for days and even today of how much just a small significant impact to what some may feel has made to their lives. I look forward to celebrating this with our community, seeing and hearing the change. It means so much. I want to thank our officers, Jodie and her team, and this council who have worked on this for months. Councillor Greco, Councillor Lawrence, who aren't here to celebrate this. They've been integral to this. I want to thank my fellow councillors. It means so much to so many different people, in particular our First Nations, the original owners, and our migrant community who have contributed so much to this municipality. Intergenerational pain. We're going to change placemaking, urban culture, our cultural vibrancy will be different. I'm so proud of this. Tonight is my last council meeting chairing as the mayor. But I tell you, this means so much to me and to many people walking through Darebin for future generations today. And I'd like to put this now to the vote. And I want to thank everybody who's made this, who's contributed to this policy and contributed to the list of places that we're going to change. So I'd like to now put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. The next report we have to consider this evening is item number 9.5, property matters. Councillors, are there any questions to the officers? But you, Councillor Williams.
No, I just...
declaration.
Yeah, I'd like to declare a conflict. I'm not sure if I'm able to move the motion also because it's in my ward.
Are you declaring it as how you're declaring a conflict? Can I just get would you like to read
the conflict,
statement?
but not a direct conflict?
Can she move that? Yeah.
Only because I live in...
interest. You have an interest that she lives near the area.
I live a street away.
Just one moment.
Well, if there's any doubt, I'd rather than not move it.
Would you like to declare your interest and we'll get somebody else to move it?
Apologies, then somebody else could move that.
Would you like to declare your interest first and read it out?
I'm just declaring a conflict as I live in a street away from this, on one of the sites.
Can I ask you to fill that?
I've done both.
Thank you. Fantastic. Do I have a mover of the motion? An interest or a conflict of interest?
Excuse me, through you, Mayor. Councillor Williams, I think you're declaring an interest but potentially not a conflict given you're part of a larger class. Is that correct?
Correct. That's what I heard,
It's okay, thank you.
Thank you.
In which case you don't need to fill the form in, but we'll note your interest. Thank you.
Oh, I thought you did. Yeah, okay. Do I have a mover, councillors?
Councillor Rennie.
Rennie, yep. And do I have a seconder? Councillor McCarthy. Thank you. Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you. So this item relates to two property matters, one in Darebin Boulevard and the other in Joffrey Street, Oakhill Avenue. These are laneway sales. This is a fairly standard procedure. Council goes through some statutory processes which involve giving notice to the community of our intention to sell and asking for community feedback on those processes. I won't talk more than that other than say this is a fairly regular item that comes before us, and it is possible that community can provide feedback to us. So if there are any concerns about the sale of land in this way, they are drawn to our attention before a final decision is made about whether or not this land should be disposed of. Typically these are parcels of land that council has no use for. We're usually talking small areas of laneway that have been discontinued for many years that are over the back of people's fences. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McArthur is a seconder. Would you like to speak to it?
Councillor Rennie's covered it.
Is there any councillor against the officer's recommendation? Are there any further speakers? I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's been carried unanimously. The next report we have to consider this evening, and I understand there's going to be a conflict. So item number 9.6, the governance report.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I'll declare an interest in relation to recommendation 10, which concerns the CEO Employment Matters Committee, and I'll absent myself for the whole item.
Thank you. Are there any other conflicts? No. Councillors, do I have a motion? Oh, actually, my understanding is that we have an alternate officer's recommendation. So can we put that on the screen, please? I'll just confirm from the office. Yeah. Can I just confirm that's your
Councillors, that's correct. What you'll notice is some minor changes to the adjusted officer recommendation at points 10, 11, 12, with item 13 removed and adjusted numbering.
Thank you. Do I have any questions to the officer before?
Might I recommend, for the sake of clarity, that we actually remove 13 from that now, so that...
Yes, yeah. Can we just remove 13
the one
completely off the screen, please? Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Can we blank the screen and then remove and then come back? Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions to the officers before I ask for a mover or a seconder? As there are no questions, can I ask for a mover? Councillor Rennie. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie. Would you like to speak as the mover?
I will, thank you, Mayor. And I gather some of my colleagues would be disappointed if I didn't start by saying that this is our standard governance report. But as usual in our standard report, there are a couple of items of interest to draw people's attention to. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate our colleague, Councillor Newton, who has been awarded a spot in the prestigious Williamson's Leadership Program, and note that it is quite an achievement, and we congratulate her on that. And, you know, in the interest of transparency, note that Council will make a contribution to this program, as will Councillor Newton, and that contribution is in keeping with Councillors' allowances for professional development. I'd also like to note that within this report, it makes note of the MAV's request that we provide feedback on an options paper as to the future arrangement of council clusters for the board of the MAV. We've had some advice from the CEO, which is in here, that the Melbourne Central Cluster would be an appropriate one for us to suggest as the chosen cluster, but also note that it is a consultation process with councils across the state, and it will be equally interesting to see what feedback other councils provide. But certainly, you know, there is some strong alignment in terms of advocacy objectives with councils in that cluster. I'd also like to take this opportunity, noting point 10 in the report, to thank Mary Crooks for her exceptional leadership and contribution to Darebin Council over the last 5 years. Mary has assisted us as independent chair of the CEO Employment Matters Committee through the recruitment of 2 CEOs. That's a really significant achievement, and worth noting that her term finished a couple of days ago. And that, you know, as part of a fairly usual process, we'll move towards a new independent chair in the future. And other than that, I draw the community's attention to the transparency policy, and also note, by way of drawing the community's attention to transparency, that this report also contains the councillor expenses report for the quarter between the 1st of July and the 30th of September. So if people are interested in how money is being spent on councillors and the sort of expenses that councillors incur, I certainly see that as a very important transparency piece for the community. There are a couple of other reports contained here, and as usual I recommend the report to the community, because I think it is a superb summary of how council goes about its operations.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy is the seconder. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor.
Alternate officer's recommendation. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I really echo the sentiments by Councillor Rennie, and obviously join her in congratulating Councillor Newton on her selection to that incredibly important program. We know many people in our own community, in fact, have completed that program, have been selected for that program, and we look forward to hearing all the things that she learns and benefiting from that here in this organisation, and also echoing the thanks to Mary Crooks AO, who, as we all know, is an eminent Victorian, someone who has contributed significantly in a whole range of roles, has been on the Victorian Honour Roll for Women, and has served this city, I think, incredibly well, and generously so, through her role as the chair of the independent chair of our CEO Employment Matters Committee. So I thank Mary for her guidance and her wisdom and her commitment to great process, and we wish her all the best with whatever the next independent chairing role or other roles she takes on. And I thank our officers to getting this. I really want to touch very quickly, Mayor, on the fact that we do have our public transparency policy here. It is an important document. It is a document which obviously provides, I think, the guarantee that our community expects and deserves in relation to how we deal with both the transparency matters that we deal with as a city, but also significantly actually responds to a requirement that we have under the Local Government Act of 2020. And just in relation to that, Mayor, one of the things that's important is that council is actually required to undertake one of these processes every 4 years and within 6 months of the election. We have the update here, and as councillors would know, it sets out very clearly both how we achieve that aspiration of transparency, the definitions there, the guarantees, and of course provides that guidance for the organisation as well, dealing with information that should be in the public realm. So I'll end it there, Mayor, and thank the officers for a very comprehensive governance report.
Thank you. We've heard from Councillor Wynne and Councillor McCarthy. Are there any councillors that wish to speak against the alternate officer's recommendation, which is now the motion? Are there any further speakers? I also want to say thank you very much to Mary Crooks for her continued contribution to the employment of the two CEOs, and it's been a pleasure working with her as the chair of the committee. I'll now put that item to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, that's been carried unanimously. Item number 10 is items to be tabled. There are no items to be tabled this evening. Items number 11, notice of motions. 11.1, the parking notice of motion. Councillor. Oh yes, of course, the CEO. Oops. But I note that Councillor Williams, you changed your notice of motion wording, and you just before you speak to it, you've circulated it. So I'm just going to ask that it be ready for the screen whilst the CEO takes his seat.
That is correct.
Yep. So I'm going to ask that. I just want to make sure that that is exactly what your new
correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Second by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak to?
Yes, thank you. The whole point was to have a report that's going to come back with the different options for engagement on the parking policy to include the community. Establishing a community advisory group with the same residents for a period of 12 months would be like another stakeholder that provides direct input on the parking policy. The advisory group will be part of the process and bring feedback, raising any concerns and issues to the table for council to consider when implementing the parking policy. The advisory group, with the assistance and guidance of our officers, that allows at arm's length, but another form of being transparent and accountable. Whereas in previous council, we made the decision in hiring consultants rather than involving those that are impacted the most. The community, the people that work, live, play and shop in Darebin. The advisory group will show that council is engaging and listening and willing to make adjustments along the way, as there are no guarantees in getting this policy that will make everyone happy. I personally believe the car parking is not broken, therefore we should not be implementing a stack of new and confusing rules around where you park, at what time and for how long, and the cost associated that will come with this new policy. But council, just like any business, which has policies in place, as it needs to show accountability to follow procedures, guidelines, rules and regulations. Only in a group of officers, I think it's important that with what's been opposed to previously and the backlash that we got from the community back in 2019, I believe that the private consultants that were paid an absolute fortune did not allow our residents to be taken, or to be actually be considered or taken part of that process. And hopefully, as I said, that considering we need to have a policy, the best way forward, that it impacts every single resident in Darebin and businesses and those who work, play and shop should also be part of that process and part of that journey if we are to establish a new policy here in Darebin. So I do look forward to Council's, which will come back in March in 2023, on the different options of how we can engage in ensuring that, that those people are on this journey also.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. That was seconded by Councillor Rennie. Would you like to speak to it as a seconder?
No, I think Councillor Williams has done a great job.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Hannan. Sorry, are you speaking against? I didn't ask that
I'm
question.
speaking against, and apologies, I'd like to again put up a small amendment.
Sorry, you're speaking against or you're foreshadowing a small amendment?
I guess I'm speaking against the current. I should skip that and just say I'd like to put up a small amendment, one word.
Thank you. And it'll be, and then that small amendment will be needs to be acceptable to the mover and the seconder. And that is Councillor Hannan.
Yes, apologies again for the late notice. It's just to add the word permit between parking and policy under A. I can speak to that.
Parking.
So it would be parking permit policy.
I don't know. Okay.
No, I won't be accepting permit because this is just anything to do with parking. It's nothing to do with any particular permits or regulations. It's just to do with parking in general and concerns.
Just one moment. I note I have to ask if that's acceptable to the mover. It is not. Now I have to ask if it's acceptable to... No. Okay. Councillor, you're for... So would you like... So this is your...
So, Mayor, it's in complete contrast to the current norm. So it's not technically allowed.
It's not directly opposite. It's just putting...
It's a totally different issue.
It doesn't mean it's directly opposite. Just one moment.
So, through you, Mayor Messina, in accordance with the governance rules, if it was directly opposite, then it would not be permissible. It's an adjustment from being broad parking policy to parking permit policy. My view would be that it is a related adjustment.
We move on. Yes. So you're moving an alternate. Do we have a seconder?
Yes.
Councillor Hannan, would you like to speak? Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. This amendment is purely for clarity of meaning and to be technically correct and accurate in terms of Council's agreed action plan. I actually have no issue with the intent of this motion. I would be otherwise happy to support the intent of this motion. It's purely just the fact that it says currently in the proposed form, the parking permit, the parking policy. There is no parking policy. As far as I'm aware, Council does not have a parking policy. So it is actually not accurate to say that we will have engagement on the parking policy. We don't have a parking policy. We do have a parking permit policy. We do have an existing process that has been discussed at previous meetings about how we deal with requests for changes to traffic and parking arrangements. My view is that this is a small change. It would really just be, to be clear, if this is the intention, I think it should be quite easy to support. If we're actually trying through this motion to start a new broader parking policy, well, that needs to be clear, and I would argue this is not the place to do that. So let's just stick to what's currently on the table, which is the parking permit policy. Happy with point B, by the way, which is to establish a community advisory group to provide input on parking matters, full stop. That's fine. But let's just be clear that we don't actually have a parking policy at this point, and this is not the way to introduce one. Thank you.
Thank you. As a seconder, would you like to speak to that, Councillor Newton?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Messina. Just briefly, so this is something that we do have in our council plan, an action that says review to amend the parking permit policy. So that's their action 237. So that exists, but the reason why this amendment makes sense is because, as Councillor Hannan pointed out, there is no parking policy. There's no parking policy in the council plan, and so this clarifies that we are talking about the parking permit policy that is in our four-year council plan. So it's just a point of clarification.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers?
I want to speak again. Are we in an alternate motion?
I'm sorry? No, what we're doing is we've got a mover and a seconder to foreshadowing an alternate, so an amendment to Councillor Williams' notice of motion. So we've heard from the speaker, from the mover and the seconder. Are there any? Is there anybody else who? Well, nobody's spoken against this one yet. You want to?
I will be speaking.
But I had Councillor Demetriadis' hand up first. So you want to speak against this one?
Against the amendment.
Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
So I'm a little bit startled by this. Firstly, because it's an amendment on the run, and because we've currently got a consultation process occurring now on parking permits. So the fact that we want options on an engagement plan about a consultation process that's already occurring makes no sense whatsoever to me. It completely changes the intent of the NOM, which is about parking, not parking permits. And I'll be foreshadowing an amendment to say outlines options for the engagement plan on a parking policy, because we don't have a parking policy, which is what this amendment is doing. It's introducing a parking policy. That's so councillors have input into how the parking system is run at this council. I'm just shocked that this is just another amendment on the run that makes no sense to me.
Thank you, Councillor Demetriadis. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams.
I will be speaking against this, as this is not the intention of my notice of motion. My intention of this notice of motion was actually to leave it open for our officers to come back to us with the options of what would be appropriate community engagement regarding anything to do with parking. I did not strictly ask them to direct officers to engage in regarding parking permit policies. I think it was important that we get that clarification in what my intent was for this in notice of motion, and it certainly wasn't about the parking permit. The whole point of this was to involve community engagement and making sure and ensuring that our community is involved in this process and not making council's decision where there's only 9 people involved, when there's 158,000 people that live in this community. On top of that, there's people who play, shop and work and have a business who I'm sure would love to have an input in this process also.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers?
Mayor, can I just ask a question? Things have been raised in the debate which I think are unclear.
I'll allow a clarified question to the officers. Yep.
Thank you. Can I just clarify whether council does in fact consider it has a parking policy at the moment, because that was been entered into debate, and I'm not sure if we've got clarity about whether that is what we have currently is considered a parking policy.
Over to Ms. Olivier.
Thank you.
So we, in looking at this, we had the benefit of a conversation with Councillor Williams, so we had interpreted it in line with the intent that she has articulated, and so essentially we've interpreted it as parking policy lowercase rather than the parking policy in capital letters, because we don't in fact have a formal parking policy under that name.
Thank you. I noticed that Councillor Demetriadis wanted to foreshadow an amendment. Are you foreshadowing an amendment, or have you had your question answered?
Sorry, Mayor, I'm not foreshadowing anything. I'm just wanting, we've had, and I thank Ms Olivier for her response. I think the question that I'm hearing, or the answer I'm hearing, if I'm right, is that Council does not have a parking policy at the moment.
Are you entering into debate?
No,
You've had your
but I'm wanting
question
to
answered.
understand the interpretation of of the previous motion was that this would enable Council to go and consult on whether it has a parking policy.
Are you entering into debate? So
I'm not entering into debate. I'm just trying to get clarity as to how it was being interpreted, because
I understood Miss Olivia answered your question. I certainly took it that way.
I just want to be clear on what we're
Just
voting
one
on
moment.
there.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
So I've interpreted the request for engagement on parking policy as kind of lowercase parking policy, which might include our current sort of how we practice and engage with the community around parking issues, as opposed to a formal policy and specific piece of guidance Council's got.
Thank you. So we've heard Councillor Hannan, who's the mover, Councillor Newton, Councillor Demetriadis and Councillor Williams, who are both against. Are there any further speakers? I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? That's Councillor Hannan and Councillor Newton. All those against? That's Councillor Williams, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Demetriadis, Councillor Rennie and Councillor Messina. That amendment's been lost. Now, Councillor Demetriadis, you foreshadowed an amendment. I think I heard that way.
Yep, just the letter A instead of the before parking policy.
Parking. Is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
But that wasn't there before, so we would normally just go back to the original.
She foreshadowed an amendment.
Okay.
So it is acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
Because it goes back to the original.
No.
Notice of motion.
Okay, so it's not. So, Councillor Demetriadis, you're foreshadowing an amendment. So I need a seconder of your amendment.
Sure.
Is there a seconder? So that's seconded by Councillor Demetriadis. So, Councillor Williams. Councillor Demetriadis, would you like to speak to
Mayor
your...
Messina, point of clarification, can I just check whether the mover can second an amendment? From a governance point of view, I'm not sure.
I can incorporate...
Through you, Mayor, if I can assist here, I'll check with governance, but I think given that we don't have a parking policy, as clarified by Ms Olivia, I think to insert the word A clarifies that matter as explained by Ms Olivia. And I'll just check with the governance whether that can be accepted as another amendment by the first mover and seconder, because that would then simplify it.
Thank you.
But I think removing the word "the" takes out any doubt that we're talking about an existing parking policy. So it's a sensible suggestion by Councillor Demetriadis just to help Council here.
Yep, thank you. The question was, can Councillor Williams accept, as the mover of the original NOM, accept the amendment? Oh, so second the amendment that was put through. Yeah.
Mayor, I'm happy to second the amendment.
Just one moment.
No, can I...
Sorry, one moment. It's addressed with the officers, so we need to wait for that.
We think that the original mover, which is Councillor Williams, and the seconder, if they're amenable, can accept it. Otherwise, Councillor Demetriadis would need to move it.
She did move it as amendment, so it was moved by Councillor Demetriadis and...
It can be accepted by
Okay.
Rennie if they're willing to do that.
I didn't accept the word A, but in light of clarification on what you've said, I wonder whether actually eliminating both the and A would be acceptable. So it would just be Adeline's options for the engagement plan on parking policy to include community workshops, to get rid of both.
So is that acceptable? So I need to ensure that that was the intent of Councillor Demetriadis. Is that your intent?
My intent is actually to receive a parking policy, and I think Councillor Rennie's intent is to just continue on as we are and just get... I'm just clarifying, which is why she's trying to take out the word A.
I'm just trying to make it consistent with the feedback from Ms Olivia, which
Okay,
is
what I'm going to propose...
lowercase parking.
Okay, what I'm going to propose, we've got plenty of time. I'm going to propose a 10-minute adjournment to 8:27 so we can clarify that. Otherwise, we're going to be diddling and daddling with the word "the" and "are," and it doesn't look good. So can I just stop the live streaming, please? and your patience. Okay, I understand there is an amendment that's going to be foreshadowed, or an amendment that, Councillor?
Thanks, Mayor. After consultation with councillors, I'd like to propose the amendment as appearing on screen there, which is just to generalise it by referring to parking matters in both points.
Is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
Yes.
Thank you. As it's acceptable, this becomes the motion. So do we have any further speakers?
Just want to make it clarified to our audience.
Sorry, you haven't got the right. There's no right of reply. If there's somebody that speaks against it, then you have a right of reply.
But there's a new amendment, so don't I have a right to speak on a new
Because
amendment?
you've accepted it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Councillor?
Look, just briefly, I just would acknowledge Councillor Williams' wishes to really find a way for the community to be involved in any consideration of any parking matters, and that's really important that we're clear on what the intent of the motion is, that the mover and seconder are moving now. And obviously the proposal that Councillor Williams has put forward is to establish a community advisory group to provide input on those matters. So that's Councillor Williams' motion, and I'm happy to support that. And I think it is correct, as resolved earlier, that we don't have a parking policy. That's not what's on the table right now. What is on the table is parking matters. And I think, if I'm correct in understanding, let's see what the report comes back with. Certainly, I think we need to be really careful about talking about changes to parking. I think this is actually about a whole range of issues that Councillor Williams has flagged. So I acknowledge and commend her on her initiative, and let's see where it goes.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. The next item we have to consider this evening is item 11.2, Mary Way, which is submitted by Councillor McCarthy. Do we have a seconder? Second by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to speak to your notice of motion?
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you also to officers on their feedback in relation to the development of this item. As councillors would recall, obviously people have had a really important connection to Mary Creek during COVID and long before that, and we have some people that still live in this city today that are incredibly responsible for the restoration and effectively the reforestation of parts of the Mary Creek corridor, so much so that people's love of the corridor, not just along the Darebin section, but also to our west in the Marybeck section and then further north and further south. The community connection is significant. It is also worth noting, and I have made reference to it in the report, as has the Mary Way collaboration, that there has also been some unfortunate incidents. One, of course, that councillors would recall in late 2019, where there was an attack on a woman on the East Coburg side, just opposite Darebin. This led, as councillors would see, to some really important work led by our neighbours, Marybeck Council, because it was on their side of the creek, to really looking at how we can ensure that the Mary Creek corridor remains, continues and is a safe place for people, but also that social connection is really acknowledged and strengthened. And alongside that we don't just look at the Mary Creek corridor from an ecological point of view. It is significant and important. We don't just look at it from a transport point of view, because there is, of course, the shared path, but we also look at it in terms of people's social connection. And of course, historically, the history of Wurundjeri engagement along that entire corridor. So what this motion does is that it calls for 2 reports, which could become effectively 1 report, about Darebin becoming a potential partner in the Mary Way community-led collaboration alongside Marybeck Council and of course Ceres and the Wurundjeri Wurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation. Mary Way means Marry Us, and the name was given to this particular project by a Wurundjeri elder. The proposal here is for Darebin to be engaged in this process, which is really about building that community vision going forward, working on the significant legacy that has been created through so much community activism over so many years, and also to really connect people and support that both the restoration activity but also the social connection activity going forward. On the 29th of April next year, there is also an event which will be hosted just across the creek over Warkwak Bridge at Ceres, and so the proposal is there for council to consider how it is involved in that event as well. A great opportunity for us to celebrate the new 5.72 hectares of new open space just near the bridge at the bottom of the Northcote Golf Course, and of course to seek a name for this, this new piece of land that we are really excited to share with the community.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Before I go to Councillor Rennie, can I just confirm, because just for continuity, Way is W-A-Y-I. So can we just correct the item number 11.2 to reflect that, please? Just an I at the end of the title. Just a small little typo. Thank you. As a seconder, Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to it?
No, I just thank Councillor McCarthy. He's done a great job talking.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? As there are none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. The next item for consideration is item 12, urgent business. Councillors, since the distribution of the agenda, the CEO has determined that an item of confidential urgent business is required to be dealt with tonight. This item will be dealt during the closed session of the meeting. Item number 13, consideration of reports considered confidential, close of meeting. In accordance with section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020, Council may resolve to close the meeting to the members of the public to consider confidential information pursuant to section 3(1) of the Act. Councillors, is there a move of the recommendation to close the meeting? That's moved by Councillor Williams, second by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? Thank you, that's been carried unanimously. Over to the officers. If we can close the meeting, please, the live streaming.